Disclaimer. I do not give permission for cloning of my voice, sampling of my voice, or the use of my voice to train AI or be used in TTS. Any unauthorized use will be prosecuted. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. I hope you are all well. A quick statement before we get started. I made a community post, and I know not a lot of people read those, so I'll say it now. Whenever I'm doing fiction stories, I do love to narrate those, but I also use those as a filler while I'm also searching out true stories. Here lately, writers are liking to use the new Chat GPT, which is an AI service. I will never, ever tell an AI written story on this channel if it does not come from a living, breathing, blood running through its veins human. I will not be narrating it. I believe true writing comes from a brain and a living soul. Not bashing anyone who uses AI, but it will not be featured on this channel. So I apologize if fictional stories end up back to back. Just know I'm using that as a filler because I would rather you, the listeners, have at least some form of vocal melatonin while I am behind the scenes searching out true stories that you all love so much. All right, end of my rant. This is going to be a different approach, as this is something that I find chilling. I sit here and narrate scary stories and missing persons and whatever have you, and this genre right here chills me to the bone. Not a light scares me, but this one does. Before we get started, let me remind you, down in the description below, you can find the link to buy me a coffee if you are enjoying what you hear, as it supports me and the channel and is greatly appreciated. Also, if you would like to become a member of Back to Ashes, it's only $1.99 a month. That information can also be found in the description box. Now, it is time to go back to ashes. For when we arise from the ashes, we are a bigger, better, brighter, and stronger person in the morning. Sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack, or tuck in and get warm, and prepare for this dose of vocal melatonin entitled Unsolved Mysteries, Volume 1. Also, right after this introduction, there will be an ad. I'll read the first case, there'll be an ad, and there'll be no more ads throughout the video. Disclaimer. Some of this information will be sensitive to some. Listening discretion is advised. The bizarre case of Aaron Gillern, 16 years and no answers. This case has conflicting information from article to article, especially surrounding Aaron's last known whereabouts. I did the best I could with what I could find, but his last movements are unfortunately unclear. The mysterious vanishing of Aaron Gillern, a 34-year-old American research assistant at the United Nations Industrial Development Organization in Vienna, Austria, continues to captivate and baffle both the public and investigators. A former seminarian and the 2006 Mr. Gay Austria winner, Aaron disappeared without a trace on October 29, 2007. Leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and conflicting information. In September 2007, Aaron returned to Cortland, New York, to spend 10 days with his mother, Catherine Gillern. She was in the process of selling her house and preparing to move to Vienna to join her son. Little did she know that her conversation on October 27th, 2007 would be the last time she would speak to Aaron before his puzzling disappearance 2 days later. It was believed by Austrian police that Aaron was last seen running naked from the Kaiserbrunel sauna in Wuppertal after an assumed physical altercation with one other person, allegedly, who went to the hospital. However, Aaron's last confirmed location was a sauna on Stephansplatz after work. This is an inconsistency that I cannot find an answer to, which is unfortunate because it's really important to know his last known location. Authorities hastily concluded that Aaron had tragically taken his own life by jumping into a canal, attributing his actions to supposed mental instability and drug use. Aaron's mother and friends vehemently disputed this notion, maintaining that he had no reason to end his life. They accused the police of bias, negligence, and attempting to cover up the truth in their investigation, suggesting Aaron could have fallen victim to a hate crime, robbery, or even trafficking. Catherine Gillian has been campaigning for justice for her son ever since his disappearance. She has hired private investigators, contacted media outlets, filed complaints with authorities, and held vigils outside the sauna every year on the anniversary of his disappearance. She has also been featured in a documentary film called Gone: The Disappearance of Aaron Gillian, which premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival in 2011. The film chronicles her search for the truth and exposes the flaws and contradictions in the police investigation. As of 2021, Aaron Gillian's case remains unsolved and his whereabouts unknown. His mother is undeterred by the lack of progress and continues to hope that he is alive and that someone will come forward with information that can help find him. What happened to Aaron Gillian? East Haven Jane Doe identified as missing boarding school student. East Haven John Doe was a teenage girl, or young woman, found dead by a truck driver in East Haven, Connecticut, on August 16, 1975. East Haven is a small suburb of New Haven, Connecticut, best known as Yale University's home. She was found floating in a drainage ditch behind a Bradley's department store, wrapped in canvas and bound with antenna wires. Medical examiners determined that she was white, around 5 foot 6 inches tall, or 167 centimeters, and likely between 18 and 26 years old. East Haven Jane Doe was suspected to be from an upper middle class or an affluent family, as she had extensive dental work. Investigators were unable to match her to any local missing persons. However, a suspect emerged in Glenn Askborn, Samantha Glenner, who was convicted in the murder of Amelia Amy Cave of Sullivan, Maine. The suspect has denied involvement in this murder, and no further leads were developed. Meanwhile, 17-year-old Patricia Melody Newsom disappeared in 1974. She had been attending an unknown boarding school in New York, though she was unhappy with the situation and ran away. Patricia, known as Trish to her loved ones, was noted to have become quite close with a friend of hers from Maine, and may have ended up there after her disappearance. Her much younger sister reported her missing in 2021 after coming across a reconstruction of Lady of the Dunes, now identified as Ruth Marie Terry, which she thought strongly resembled Patricia. Their DNA was not a match. Inspired by recent successes with genetic genealogy and solving cold cases, East Haven police ordered an exhumation of Jane Doe from an unmarked grave at a long-abandoned cemetery. The cemetery, notorious for keeping inaccurate records, mislabeled the location of Jane Doe, and authorities initially exhumed the grave of a different person. However, once they successfully located her, they were able to get a viable DNA sample for genealogy. With the help of Identifiers International, East Haven Jane Doe was identified as Patricia Melody Newsom, likely around 18 at the time of her death. She was beaten to death and had possible ties to the Special Olympics. Who is Jane Doe? The badly decomposed body of a black female was discovered on March 25, 2000, in Prince George's County, Maryland. She had most likely been beaten to death. Her lower half was unclothed, which may have been the result of a sexual assault. Her killer then dumped her body in a creek near Piscataway Creek, Stream Valley Park in Clinton. Jane Doe was most likely deceased by the time she was placed in the creek. While her exact cause of death has been disputed, the circumstances clearly suggest that this was a homicide. When her remains were discovered, Jane Doe had likely been deceased for several months. With this information, she could have died as recently as late January 2000, though other investigators have speculated that she perished in 1999. C.S. John Doe weighed around 125 pounds or 58 kilograms, had an estimated height of 5'3", and had black hair with 12-inch extensions. It's unknown if she had any distinguishing marks or tattoos. DNA was eventually extracted, and there was enough tissue to collect a few fingerprints. Investigators had little to go on with her dentals. However, as the mandible, or the jawbone, was apparently never recovered. As a result, her forensic reconstructions could only estimate what the lower half of her face looked like. The Jane Doe earned her nickname due to the handwritten initials that were found on the tag of her shirt. Naturally, it was assumed that investigators would be combing through missing persons reports of women whose names had those initials. But it appears that the initials were a dead end, which implies that Jane Doe wasn't reported missing, or the shirt belonged to someone else. Profile. One of the most confusing things about this case is the potential age range of Jane Doe. NamUs lists her as possibly being between the ages of 13 and 35, whereas her official Doe Network page states that her age cannot be determined, though they initially suspected that she was between 15 and 30. But what we do know is that she was still relatively young when she passed away. Jane Doe's clothing also gives us a fair bit of information to go on. When she died, CS was wearing the following items: white sports bra size 34, possibly from a brand called Teen Form. White or beige undershirt with spaghetti straps. This was where the CS clue was discovered. A black long-sleeve t-shirt, collar size 38 to 40, from the Hanes brand Beefy T-line. A white beige t-shirt with 1995 Special Olympics World Games, New Haven, Connecticut, USA on the front. Waist-length blue jean jacket, size medium, from the brand Gap. Pink or purple nail polish, brand unknown. Color uncertain due to decomposition. Plastic wristwatch with Tweety Bird on the face. Multicolored plastic band, red, blue, green, and yellow. To public knowledge, her underwear, pants, socks, and shoes have never been found or located. I could find very little information about CS Jane Doe online. No photos of her clothing or accessories have been posted. Her case was briefly covered in a YouTube video by Marshmallow Connie, who recreated CS Jane Doe's forensic composite and updated it with the proper clothing based on the description. No major organizations have taken on her case, despite DNA being available. As of this post, it's unclear where her remains are located, or if they have been cremated. Possible theories about her identity and lifestyle. She may have had a mental or cognitive impairment, or a loved one who was disabled. This is one of the most common theories I saw regarding CS Jane Doe on her web sleuth page, and I'll admit that it crossed my mind too. A lot of people have questioned the significance of her 1995 Special Olympics shirt. In my personal opinion, and from experience, most people wear clothing like that in terms of showing support. A loved one, friend, or family member who has a disability. While nothing has been noted about CS having a physical disability or impairment, it's possible that what she was dealing with may have been mental or cognitive. For example, a cognitive impairment can mean memory loss or trouble learning new things. A mental impairment could mean something along the lines of behavioral issues, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, etc. But it's also possible that the shirt isn't necessarily significant. It may have been a gift, hand-me-down, or something picked up at Goodwill. Others speculate that she may have been an adult with a childlike mind, given the shirt and Tweety Bird wristwatch. Someone was taking care of her, or she had decent resources. Regardless of whether she was an adult or teenager, CS appeared to be taken care of. At the very least, she had enough resources to live what appeared to be a relatively healthy life. She wasn't overweight or underweight. There were no traces of drugs or alcohol in her system, or even signs of long-term use evidently. And she had no healed injuries that would suggest being in an abusive household or relationship. Going on the theory that she was an impaired individual, her caregivers or guardians could have been very loving people. But if everything was going well at home, wouldn't someone matching the description and probable circumstances of CS be reported missing? Most caregivers or parents of disabled individuals acknowledge that, while things are often stressful and taxing, there's an element of being overprotective for the loved one in question. If they go missing, the caretaker or parent is going to do everything they can to make sure they are found. Lastly, she was wearing a Gap jean jacket, which isn't necessarily cheap, even back then. Her nails were painted, and she had extensions put into her hair. I think there were a few luxuries she enjoyed, or sometimes she would treat herself. Even if you focus on the wristwatch itself, that tells me that she needed it. Whether she was running errands, holding a part-time job, waiting for public transport, or going about a pretty generic routine, she needed that watch for something. She wasn't reported missing for a variety of reasons. CS could have been a foster child that slipped through the cracks of the system. Even if one or both of her guardians aren't directly responsible for her death, they could have been cashing welfare or disability checks and didn't want the source of income to stop if she was reported missing. Vice versa. and they are responsible for her death, the theory still applies. She may have been an isolated individual, especially as an adult living by herself. Few friends, no family. How do you know whether or not to report someone missing if you've had few interactions with them, or just aren't aware of their existence? Exactly. CS might have been a young runaway who was sick of being mistreated or forgotten. And the last one especially hurts me to think about. But what if CS finally aged out of the foster care system or group home she was staying at? She does whatever she can to get ready for the real world, and they wish her goodbye but don't stay in touch. She was probably doing fine on her own until someone came along and took everything away from her. Conclusion. Who was CS Jane Doe? Was she a runaway who met the wrong person? If she had a disability, is her mother or caregiver responsible for her passing? Are the clothing and accessories just a red herring? Last year, a few people speculated that CS could have been a missing teen named Lakeisha Buckner. In August 1999, Butler allegedly ran away from home after her mother expressed concern in Buckner's interest in older men. Buckner, then 16, reportedly left with an unidentified Hispanic male. She had been known to run away before, but this time she didn't stay in touch. Buckner had a heart murmur, speech impairment, and unspecified learning disabilities. When last seen, she also had hair extensions. Shortly before her disappearance, Buckner's mother had allegedly planned to press charges against a group of men who had been supplying her daughter with drugs and alcohol. If she is alive today, Buckner would be 39. Her case remains unsolved. The only major discrepancy in Buckner being CS, Jane Doe, is the height difference. Buckner was allegedly no taller than 4'7", while the Jane Doe was 5'3". Given the amount of unsolved homicides and unidentified remains in the state of Maryland alone, I'm not sure how long it'll take for people to go back to this case. But there's someone out there who knows her identity. Do you recognize CS Jane Doe? Sometime during the first 3 weeks of May 1991, an Irish couple vanished off the face of the earth. Where are Connor and Sheila Dwyer? Disappearance. Connor and Sheila Dwyer, a married couple residing in Fermoy, County Cork, Ireland, mysteriously vanished in their early 60s. They were last spotted attending a funeral at St. Patrick's Church, located near their home on Chapel Hill, on April 30th, 1991 at 9:30 a.m. The following day, on May 1st, 1991, Sheila had a phone conversation with her sister, Maisie. However, after that call, the couple was never heard from again. The precise date of their disappearance remains unknown. On May 18th, 1991, Sheila's sister Maisie, concerned as she hadn't heard from Sheila in nearly 3 weeks, which was unusual given her sister's close relationship, knocked on the door, but there was no answer. She and Sheila's other sister, Nellie, reported the couple's disappearance to the Gardaí, or Irish police, on May 22nd, 1991. By the time the last communication had taken place 3 weeks prior, when Maisie spoke with Sheila on the phone and everything seemed ordinary. May 1st, 1991. Upon forcing their way in and searching the couple's home, the Gardaí discovered all their personal belongings, such as clothing, passports, money, photo albums, and jewelry. Strikingly, everything appeared eerily normal. The couple's reading glasses lay peacefully on the sofa, and their bank cards and other personal stuff was intact. The bed was nearly made, and there was no sign of any struggle or hurried departure. A biscuit tin holding 1,000 pounds in cash was the only unusual feature found. Clearly, there had been no robbery. The sole item missing was their white Toyota, bearing the registration number 5797ZT. Their bank accounts were not accessed. Investigation. The Gardaí initiated a comprehensive investigation that continues to be active even today. Yet, they have been unable to uncover any leads or evidence that might explain the couple's disappearance or whereabouts. They have conducted searches in bodies of water close to the couple's home, carried out ground searches, and interviewed numerous individuals. On several occasions, the Gardaí have appealed to the public for any information regarding the couple or their vehicle, which they believe could be crucial in resolving the mystery. Additionally, they have pursued potential sightings of the couple in Germany and other locations, but none have been substantiated. Aftermath. The disappearance of the Dwyers has left their family, friends, and neighbors both perplexed and heartbroken. The couple was known for their kind, gentle, and quiet nature, preferring to keep to themselves. Sheila, a poised and elegant woman, always appeared well-dressed and put together. She belonged to the well-known Sweeney family from Fermoy. Connor was a sociable and outgoing individual who held various jobs, including working as a plumber, a hackney driver, and a chauffeur for a wealthy German businessman named Fritz Wolf. Wolf frequently vacationed in Castle Lyons, a nearby village, and Connor drove luxurious vehicles like Rolls Royces for Wolf. Luxury cars were often spotted outside the Dwyer home. The Dwyers had 2 sons who grew up in a happy and normal family life. They have not given up hope of finding out what happened to their parents, but they have also tried to move on with their lives. One of the sons, also named Connor, described his father as a hilarious man who often played jokes on them. He recalled, "I can remember one occasion, many years ago. I was about 4 years of age, and I was at Presentation Convent, and my first teacher was a Sister Carmel. And for some reason, I think it was a Friday or Saturday morning at 8:30, and I came downstairs without my trousers. My father was going out the front door, and as he was going out, he said, 'Oh, good morning, Sister Carmel.' And I legged it thinking the nun was standing outside the door, with great screeches going back upstairs. I can still hear my father splitting a gut laughing at the front door. He just couldn't stop. He was bent in two. And my mother going, 'You're a horrible man. Don't do that to that child.' The Dwyer sons could not think of anyone who would want to hurt their parents, or any reason they would have run away and left their life and family behind. The vanishing of Connor and Sheila Dwyer endures as one of Ireland's most perplexing unsolved missing persons cases. Even after 3 decades of relentless investigations and public appeals, neither the couple nor their vehicle have been discovered. The murder of Dana Ireland. On Christmas Eve 1991, on the island of Hawaii, 23-year-old Dana Ireland went for a bike ride in Kapoho. Ireland's mangled bicycle, shoe, and clumps of her hair were found by bystanders who called 911. 30 minutes later, Ireland was found nude from the waist down and barely conscious in the bushes of a fishing trail on Wawa Road. Ireland died at the hospital from her injuries. At the Wawa Trail, Ireland's second shoe, shorts, and a Jimmy Z t-shirt were recovered by police. There were DNA samples found on Ireland's shorts and the shirt. The case went cold until 1994, when John Gonsalves, who was facing decades in prison on drug charges, told Hawaii County Police that his half-brother, Frank Pauline, had information on Ireland's murder. When Pauline was interviewed, he named brothers Albert Ian and Sean Switzer as the killers. The Pauline and Switzer families lived in the same neighborhood and reportedly did not get along. Pauline also claimed he was present during the murder, saying, "They ran over Dana Ireland, stuffed her in a trunk, and took her to another location. They started having intercourse with the girl, started biting her. Everything else happened after that." Pauline was serving 10 years in prison at the time for an unrelated sex crime and theft. In 1996, Pauline recanted his story, saying that his half-brother told him to make a deal so they could both get out of prison. Regardless, Pauline and Switzer brothers were charged with sexual assault, kidnapping, and murder. DNA samples were taken from the suspects and tested against bodily fluids found on the gurney sheet used when Ireland was transported to the hospital, and swabs from her sexual assault kit. The tests exclude Pauline and the Switzers. The charges were dismissed. Police claim there must have been another person involved. In 1999, an inmate came forward and claimed one of the Switzers confessed to the murder, leading to the brothers and Pauline being indicted again. At trial, Sean Switzer took a plea deal which implicated his brother Albert Ian, who was convicted as well as Pauline. In 2005, Ian applied for the Innocent Project, who reviewed the Ireland case. Several inconsistencies in evidence pointing away from Pauline and the Switzers were revealed, such as dental impressions from the three men that did not match a bite wound found on Ireland's chest. Police searched Ian Switzer's Volkswagen Beetle for Ireland's hair and blood, and found no traces, even though he did not own that car until a month after the murder. More damning evidence pointing away from the suspects are the questionable witnesses at the trial that linked Pauline to the crime. One man who claimed Pauline confessed to him could not even identify him in the courtroom. Prosecutors claimed the Jimmy Z t-shirt found with Ireland belonged to Pauline, even though it did not fit him. During Ian Switzer's trial, prosecutors offered him 20 years probation, which he refused. "They offered me 20 years probation. I said no. I had nothing to do with this." Prosecution said Switzer hit Ireland with his Volkswagen and drove her to the fishing trail, completely ignoring that he didn't own that car until after the murder, and several witnesses described a pickup truck in the area. Regardless of the inconsistencies, Ian Switzer was convicted. Jerry Switzer, Sean and Ian's father, remembers John Ireland, Dana's father, apologizing to him in the courtroom. After Ian was convicted, Sean accepted a plea deal and pled guilty to the lesser charges of manslaughter and kidnapping to avoid trial. As part of the deal, Sean would have to take a polygraph. The results of the first polygraph showed that Sean was lying about being involved in the murder. Sean later admitted that he had nothing to do with Ireland's murder and took the deal to avoid prison. After the Innocence Project reviewed Ian Switzer's case on January 23rd, a jury overturned his conviction based on new DNA evidence, and Ian Switzer was released. Attorneys are pushing to get Sean's charges dropped as well, as Pauline died in prison in 2015. The new DNA evidence that was found was on the Jimmy Z t-shirt used to convict Pauline. The Innocence Project found sperm and sweat on the armpits that belonged to an unknown man that was a match to the rest of the DNA found on Ireland. Tire treads found at the scene also pointed to a large pickup truck or a van. Please feel free to leave your thoughts and comments below as to who you think the real killer of Ireland is. The mysterious disappearance of Catherine Eggleston. Catherine Scott Eggleston, also known as Katie, was a 22-year-old college graduate who vanished without a trace in Portland, Oregon on August 2, 1993. Her case remains one of the most notorious cold cases in Portland history. Background: Catherine was born on May 4, 1971 in Redmond, Oregon, to Paul and Heather Eggleston, both teachers. She was one of 4 daughters and grew up in Redmond. She attended Oregon State University in Corvallis, where she majored in English and joined the Alpha Chi Omega sorority. She graduated from OSU in the spring of 1993. After graduating, Catherine moved to Gresham, Oregon, a suburb of Portland, where she lived with her older sister Janet. She took a job as a sales representative for AllNet Communication Services Incorporated, a telecommunications company based in Lake Oswego, Oregon. It was her first day on the job alone when she disappeared. Disappearance. On the morning of August 2, 1993, Catherine attended an AllNet meeting and made sales calls at businesses on Northeast Whitaker Way. She also stopped at a bank, a gasoline station, and a Burger King restaurant near Lloyd Center. That afternoon, she made calls in the then Port of Portland building in the 700 block of Northeast Multnomah Street. She was last seen around 2:15 p.m. in the building's lobby, making telephone calls. 5 witnesses stated that she looked worried and preoccupied. A client of Catherine's, whom she had just had an appointment with, saw her get off the building's elevator in the company of an unknown man wearing a blue blazer. He described the man as having dark hair and a dark complexion. Catherine has never been heard from again, and the man she was last seen with has never been identified. Shortly after 5 p.m., a witness noticed a silver-gray Volkswagen Golf, similar to Catherine's, parked in the Port of Portland parking lot. Catherine's supervisor was scheduled to meet her at 5 p.m. in Lake Oswego, but she never arrived for the meeting. When Eggleston failed to return to the home she shared with her sister Janet, Janet notified their father, who traveled to the Portland area from Redmond on August 3rd. Catherine's car was officially located by a security guard around 12:30 a.m., the day after she was last seen. The vehicle was in the parking lot of an industrial complex in the 12,000 block of Northeast Airport Way, 9 miles from the Port of Oregon building. The vehicle was unlocked, its windows were rolled down, and the keys were in the ignition. Catherine's purse and its contents were in the front seat, and her workout clothes were in the back seat, but her all-net binder was missing. Her passport was also missing and never found. There were no indications that a struggle had taken place. Investigation. The investigation by Portland law enforcement into Catherine's disappearance was significantly focused on her elder sister's upcoming sentencing regarding tax evasion. Detectives theorized that Catherine may have fled intentionally to avoid testifying against her sister, though her family repeatedly denied any connection between the two incidents. Another possible suspect in Catherine's case is Joel Patrick Courtney, a convicted sexual assaultist and murderer who pleaded guilty to the kidnapping, sexual assault, and murder of Brooke Wilberger, another OSU student who had been missing from Corvallis since 2004. Courtney has a long history of criminal offenses, substance abuse, and possible mental illness. He has traveled extensively throughout his life. He is known to have been in Alaska, Florida, Arizona, and Mexico, in addition to Oregon and New Mexico. Authorities believe he has harmed other women besides Wilberger, and Catherine is considered a possible victim. As of 2021, Catherine's whereabouts remain unknown. Her case is classified as endangered missing by the Charlie Project. Her family still hopes for answers and justice for Catherine. What happened to Kathleen Peringer? On April 17, 1989, 41-year-old Kathleen Hazel Peringer from Riverton, Wyoming, mysteriously disappeared. That morning, wearing a bathrobe and carrying her purse and glasses, Kathleen waved goodbye to her 14-year-old daughter, Kelly, as she left for school. It would be the last time Kelly ever saw her mother. When Kelly returned home after school and found her mother gone, she was concerned. Usually, Kathleen would leave a note for Kelly to tell her where she was going. Yet, there was no note to be found. She also discovered the ashtray on the coffee table had been cleaned and now contained 2 cigarette butts, one of her mother's brand and another that belonged to Donald Kenneth Pack Jr., a friend of Kathleen's ex-boyfriend. In the weeks leading up to the disappearance, Pack had been visiting Kathleen frequently. They began hanging out more after she and her ex-boyfriend broke up. Pack had mentioned wanting to buy Kathleen a computer. Kelly did not like Pack and found him to be creepy. Later that afternoon, Pack stopped by the house looking for Kathleen. He asked to use the phone, quickly dialed a number without leaving a message, and left abruptly. Concerned, Kelly went to a friend's house and left a note for her mother. When she returned later that night, the note was still untouched, and there was no sign of Kathleen. Kelly called her grandmother and notified the police of her mother's disappearance. After Kathleen's disappearance, her daughter found her diary and gave it to the police. According to the diary, Peringer had been dating Donald Kenneth Pack Jr., who had been paroled from prison a few years earlier. He had a criminal history that included aggravated sexual assault and kidnapping, and he was a suspect in more than 30 sexual assaults in the Jackson, Wyoming area. Psychologists describe Pack as being very intelligent and very dangerous. In their profiling of him, they concluded that he would probably kill his next victim to keep her from reporting the attack. Additionally, Pack's preferred victim was a single or divorced woman in her mid-30s, slightly overweight, and of below average to average height. This description matched Kathleen Peffringer. It remains unclear whether Pack or anyone else was ever questioned by the authorities. Kathleen's vehicle was left at her home, and her loved ones described her as a responsible and punctual woman who was attending classes at Central Wyoming College. Authorities believe Kathleen left her home willingly with someone she knew and intended to be gone for only a short time. They suspect she was the victim of a homicide. Her case remains unsolved. A lawless execution. The brutal murder of Angela Michelle Lawless and the false conviction of Josh Kezer. Introduction. In November 1992, Missouri Deputy Sheriff Rick Walter pulled over on the side of the highway in Benton, Missouri. Walter thought that he was walking up to an abandoned car. Worst case scenario, Walter must have thought he was surprising someone sleeping in their car, perhaps a homeless person. Unfortunately, what he found was far more sinister and disturbing. Walter stumbled upon the dead body of Angela Michelle Lawless, a 19-year-old woman. Her body would show evidence that this had been the result of a murder, but neither she nor the police would ever find out who was behind it. Not long thereafter, local inmates awaiting trial themselves claimed that 17-year-old Joshua Kezer had confessed the murder to them. They turned him in. Authorities spoke to a local man who claimed to have seen a white car near Lawless's abandoned vehicle, perhaps connecting that man to the crime scene. This local man later fingered Kezer as the potential perpetrator that he'd seen near the car. Another young woman stated that Kezer had been at a party with Lawless and that the two had had a disagreement. That was enough for police, who arrested Kezer, content that they had found Lawless's murder. The jury agreed, convicting Kezer of first-degree murder. There was only one problem. 16 years later, Kezer would be released from prison and exonerated, with the police admitting that they had rendered a false conviction in the case. Kezer then successfully sued the city for his unlawful detainment, winning about $4 million and donating $10,000 to the sheriff's office to be used to find Michelle Lawless's real killer. Therefore, the murder of Michelle Lawless is a double tragedy. Double because of Lawless's murder going unsolved and because of Kezer's false conviction. So, how did we get there? And who really killed Michelle Lawless back in 1992? Though we may not get definitive answers, we can, at the very least, examine the facts of the case. The murder of Michelle Lawless. When 19-year-old Michelle Lawless's body was found on the side of Interstate 77, on a ramp just outside Benton, Missouri, authorities immediately knew that she had been murdered. Blood evidence suggested that Lawless had ran for her life and fought against her attacker before being dragged back to her car. After being placed back in her car, Lawless was shot 3 times. The police did what they often do in these situations and began questioning Lawless's boyfriend. Unfortunately for them, he had a solid alibi and passed a polygraph, which seemed to disprove their initial theory on the case. They were lost until those jailhouse tips came in on Joshua Kezer. These jailhouse snitches never should have been taken seriously. They were awaiting trial for their own criminal indictment and were openly using Kezer's supposed confession in a bid to reduce their own sentences. This alone should have raised red flags for investigators. However, even if law enforcement took their claim seriously, there were other factors that should have tipped police off that Kezer wasn't their guy. The evidence suggested that Lawless had died after a violent struggle, but there was no DNA evidence or fingerprints to link Kezer to the scene as one would expect. Additionally, the murder weapon was never located. This very much feels like a case of the police being desperate to solve the case, and taking whatever, or perhaps whoever, they could get, whether they've actually convicted the right person or not. For them, the witness that placed Kezer at a party arguing with Lawless, and the other witness that identified Kezer as being the man in the white car that he had seen near the crime scene, was more than enough to pin the murder on Kezer. Mark Abbott's changing story. The witness who eventually placed Kezer at the scene of the crime was 19-year-old nursing student Mark Abbott. Abbott's testimony was the cornerstone of law enforcement's case against Kezer. They couldn't have picked a shakier, more unstable cornerstone. Unfortunately for Kezer, this didn't much matter, as Abbott's testimony would still be enough to put him away for Lawless's murder. Abbott was the first person to discover the crime scene. At the time, he claimed that he had been headed home after a night of drinking when he saw Lawless's vehicle sitting alongside the highway. It is not clear why, but Abbott stopped and inspected the vehicle. Discovering blood, he panicked and drove to a nearby gas station to report his find to police. When Abbott was questioned by police, he reported seeing the white vehicle near the scene of the crime and claimed that the driver might have been Latino. For the record, Kezer is white. It later came out that Abbott would also claim that the driver had been another specific man who was black. 5 years later, faced with narcotics charges, Abbott would change his story yet again in an attempt to gain leniency with sentencing. He now claimed that he had been there when Lawless had been murdered, claiming that a married friend of his had been having an affair with Lawless. After a fight, Abbott claimed Lawless had stormed off, and Abbott and the friend had pursued her. They had gotten out of their cars at the crime scene to argue, and Abbott claimed that he heard gunshots, after which Abbott's friend fled on foot. Discovering Lawless's body, Abbott then went to report the crime scene to police. What conclusions can we draw from Mark Abbott's changing stories? This is only one thing that we can say with absolute certainty. Mark Abbott is not a reliable witness and should not be relied upon as such. His use as a key witness in Kezer's trial was absurd. It's hard to tell whether there is an actual truth in any of Abbott's stories, and we may never know for certain what he really knows. He may well be a suspect himself, though, to my knowledge, He has not been named one by law enforcement. Rick Walter fights for justice. As mentioned above, Rick Walter was the deputy sheriff who discovered Lawless's body along the side of the highway. While many cops in his county were more than happy to lock Heather up for her murder, Heather's conviction never set right with Walter. Therefore, in 2005, now sheriff, Walter reopened the case despite death threats directed at him for doing so. He looked further into Mark Abbott's testimony and noted the numerous inconsistencies within it. He looked further into the jailhouse informants who had initially implicated Heather and found that they had recanted their testimony prior to Heather's trial before recanting their recantations. He looked further into the woman who had identified Heather as arguing with Lawless at a party. Walter spoke to the party hosts and discovered that Heather had not even been at their party, nor had he been invited. The party guest who had placed Heather there arguing with Lawless recanted her identification of him, admitting that it must have been someone else. Walter also looked further into a piece of evidence that law enforcement had claimed was evidence of Heather's violent struggle with Lawless. A red stain on Heather's jacket that police claimed, but could not prove, was blood. After further testing, Walter determined that the substance was, in fact, tomato juice, not blood. With basically every shred of evidence against Heather discredited, a habeas corpus petition was filed on Heather's behalf. This petition alleged in part that the prosecutor in the case had withheld evidence that would have resulted in Heather's acquittal. A judge granted Heather's motion, and the charges against him were dismissed on February 18, 2009. He was finally released from prison the following day. He won a massive civil suit filed against the county and donated $10,000 of his legal winnings to the sheriff's office, earmarked for the continuing investigation into the murder of Michelle Lawless. Who really killed Michelle Lawless? It seems quite evident that Joshua Heather did not kill Michelle Lawless. Who then did? 14 years after charges against Heather were dismissed, we don't seem to have an answer to that question. That doesn't mean that there hasn't been progress within her investigation. In 2013, Lawless's body was exhumed so that wounds on her body could be tested for the first time, including wounds that appeared to have been left by fingernails, presumably from her attacker. Heather had expressed concern and skepticism at the time, noting how emotional an exhumation can be. Not so much for him as for the Lawless's family, fearing that an exhumation that did not lead to anything new in the case could be opening old wounds for no reason. 10 years later, Heather's fears have proved prescient, as nothing seems to have come from this action. In 2019, Scott County prosecutor Amanda Oesch pledged to do an independent review of Lawless's case upon taking office. She made good on that pledge, but what she found was rather disappointing. Rather than discovering a potential new lead or evidence that might lead to the arrest of Lawless's actual killer, Oesch discovered just how disorganized Scott County police files on the Lawless case were. Oesch released a statement in early 2022, making this information available to the public, and stating that her current objective was the organization and digitization of Lawless's case file, which she believes will be a massive step forward in making progress in this now 30-year-old cold case. Will we ever discover the true identity of Michelle Lawless's killer? The fact that this case received a public update just last year gives me some hope. The thing that would make solving this case more likely would be if law enforcement was able to recover DNA evidence during the 2013 exhumation that could lead to the killer. While many would assume that they would have tested any DNA that was found back in 2013, it is not believed that we can put it past this police department to leave potential DNA evidence in storage, rather than examining it to the fullest extent possible. While Rick Walter should be commended for his admirable work on this case, he was, unfortunately, the exception rather than the rule in a police department that largely seemed content to let Lawless's true killer walk free, while an innocent man spent years of his life behind bars for murder that he almost certainly did not commit. Michelle Lawless's case is one that should make you frustrated. It makes me frustrated, particularly the manner in which it was handled, or rather mishandled, time and time again by law enforcement. That being said, it does bring me some peace of mind that Lawless's case has not been forgotten, and that she may find justice yet. Who killed 8-year-old Mackenzie Branham? On the night of April 27, 2006, just a month before her 9th birthday, Mackenzie Branham was asleep in a second-floor bedroom of her mother's Jeffersonville, Ohio house. She had only recently gone to stay at the house where her mother, Mary Branham, and her mother's boyfriend, Kenneth Mossbarger, lived. Mackenzie's parents were divorced at the time. Sometime during the night, as the family slept, a fire erupted. Mary and Kenneth were able to escape. They were unable to get to Mackenzie, and she was found dead by members of the fire department who responded to the call. Ohio's fire marshal determined that the fire's cause was arson, and that an accelerant exploded in the foyer of the home. Mackenzie's death was ruled a homicide. The autopsy reported the cause of her death as acute carbon monoxide toxicity due to inhalation of products of combustion. Mackenzie's father, Donald Branham, was cleared as a suspect, but no other information on other suspects, other than there are none. Fayetteville County Sheriff investigators have been pretty tight-lipped about the case, but bits of information have been released thanks to Donald. 3 months after Mackenzie died, the clothes that she was wearing the night of the fire that had been taken into evidence were destroyed. The Fayette County Coroner's Office requested the wet and partially burned clothes be destroyed 3 months after the fire because they had little significance to the case. The sheriff's office commented that investigators never had the chance to examine Mackenzie's clothes because they were in the possession of the coroner. A document by a Montgomery County Coroner's Office investigator indicates that semen was found on the body of Mackenzie Branham during her autopsy. This information only came to light around 2017. The investigator's report states, on September 23rd of 2006, I did receive a laboratory report from the MVRCL pertaining to evidence recovered during the autopsy of the decedent. Vaginal, rectal, and oral swabs were reported to be positive for semen. This case is a contract case from Fayette County, which occurred on April 27th of 2006. There has been no other information about the DNA or if any further testing has been done since. In 2017, Mackenzie's body was exhumed in an attempt to find additional DNA. But again, no information on whether or not anything was discovered. Although Mackenzie's mother or boyfriend was never named as a suspect, her behavior on the night of the fire definitely is odd. According to a report by the county coroner who responded to the scene of the fire, Fireman Harper told me that when they arrived, they were told that the mother was standing on a porch across the road from her home, and that when the first responders to the scene arrived, her truck was outside running. The firefighters estimates that from the time he arrived on fire truck number 3 until the time that they were informed that there was someone still inside and where they might actually be was approximately 15 to 20 minutes. Donald says that he knew about the truck being at the house, but he didn't know that it was running when first responders arrived. Maybe the mother was in shock, but it definitely seems odd that she waited 15 to 20 minutes to say that Mackenzie was still in the house. New investigators are on the case, and because it is still open, there is more information that hasn't been released. There are suspicions about Mackenzie's mother and her boyfriend. Donald revealed that after Mackenzie's death, he found out that she and her brother were abused in the home that McKinney would later die in, and that the abuse was documented. No action was taken, however. It was also discovered that Mackenzie's mother and her boyfriend stole donation money to be used for Mackenzie's funeral and headstone. They went on a vacation with the money 2 weeks after Mackenzie died. Donald has been at the forefront of finding out who killed his daughter, but no evidence was found about Mackenzie's mother doing the same. This year, Mackenzie would be 26 years old. Back in 2006, she was a third-grade student at Jeffersonville Elementary School. Mackenzie loved school and was a straight-A student who was into athletics. Her teacher described her this way: "She always came to school each day with a big smile on her face. She was a happy-go-lucky young lady." On May 3, 1992, 19-year-old Natasha Ashley would be found burned to death in the back of her Chevrolet Camaro, just hours after attending a drug and alcohol-infused party. With no suspects, no evidence, and no motive, this case remains unsolved. What happened to Natasha? Introduction. Natasha Ann Ashley was born on May 11, 1972, to single-parent Karen Woodard. Growing up in Livingston, Texas, Natasha was known to live her life to the fullest. She was beautiful. She was fun, outgoing, popular, and loved by anyone who knew her. She enjoyed playing the piano, cheerleading, and having fun with friends and family. After graduating in 1990 from Odessa High School in Odessa, Texas, Natasha moved to College Station, Texas, where she got an apartment with a few roommates. She was working at the local Dairy Queen and was really looking forward to her first year away at college. Despite these significant life changes, she was in frequent contact with her loved ones back home in Livingston. Timeline. Saturday, May 2nd, 1992, Natasha attended a birthday party for 18-year-old Deborah Fowler, located in the 5 Acres Independent Subdivision in Shepherd, Texas, with an unnamed male friend. Assuming the night would be without issue, things quickly took a turn for the worse. According to reports, mainly unreliable statements from teenagers at the party who were high and drunk, Natasha was said to be involved in a physical altercation with another young woman, Cindy Henning, and her boyfriend James Jim Morton. A verbal exchange started between the two girls, which ended in Natasha being kicked in the head, allegedly, by Morton thereafter. Once the situation settled is when Natasha seemingly up and left the party alone around 3 a.m. Around 10 a.m. the next morning, a passerby came across Natasha's burned 1989 Camaro on a dirt road, about a mile from where the party had been the previous night. Police arrived to the scene thinking the car had possibly been stolen and dumped, but it wasn't until the car was towed and at the impound lot were Natasha's charred and seemingly cremated remains found by her mother, Karen. It just broke her. From that moment on, she changed. Her mind was always concentrating on Natasha. It shook the family up, said Chad Woodard, Natasha's brother. Investigation. Later that same day, police returned to the area where Natasha's car was found, but search efforts for clues yielded no results. There were no footprints, no tire tracks, and nothing to indicate a struggle had taken place. Detectives initially believed that a fire started on the front passenger seat, and that an accelerant was used, but not much came from this discovery. More on this here shortly. It is also important to mention it rained the day of the party and the morning the car was found. Some witnesses made claims that Natasha was followed and killed by Henning and Morton, while others stated that the family member of a higher authority figure killed Natasha, or that drug dealers owed money from Natasha were responsible for her death. Additionally, a man named Anthony Cornelius provided police with his own statement that implicated Cindy Herring and James Morton as having a role in Natasha's death. On January 14, 1993, Cindy was arrested and charged with aggravated assault. In March of that same year, James was also taken into custody, facing the same charges. However, the two were released a short time after, as Cornelius changed his story and recanted his statement. Since then, there have been no additional arrests made. Theories. Rumors have run rampant in this case, and it seems to me like the investigators involved may have differentiated opinions as well. In 2017, retired Chief Deputy of San Jacinto County, Tom Branch, sat down with KHOU 11 News and made pretty outward statements during that interview. They identified some of the accelerant as what they call drip gas. We can actually get that product out of the oil, well, if you know what you are doing, Tom stated. When asked what made the party so hard to investigate, Tom briefly mentions that there were people in attendance at the party that were family members of elected officials and others in Polk County. Earlier this year, former Harris County prosecutor Kelly Siegler also sat down with KHU 11 News to explain a new possible theory in regard to Natasha's case. That it wasn't a homicide at all, but a tragic accident. Kelly believes that after a high and drunk Natasha left the party, her car got stuck, and no to avail. Although still not sure how the fire started, the lab that initially stated that an accelerant was used is no longer in business. Therefore, the initial claims made cannot be confirmed. Kelly states Natasha panicked while her car was stuck and on fire and died while attempting to escape through the back end. For additional context, Kelly revisits the scene of where the vehicle was found and explains this theory in her TV series, Cold Justice, on the Oxygen Channel. While researching this case, a book was stumbled upon on Amazon called Hiding in Plain Sight 2, Who Killed Natasha Ashley, which is apparently a series written by Dr. Alan Ashworth and some relatives of Natasha. In the description, it's noted that Natasha was gang sexually assaulted, stomped and shot to death, dismembered, and also insinuates that this case is and has been a local cover-up. However, it is yet to be seen if these claims were corroborated elsewhere. What are your thoughts about what happened to Natasha? Was this a tragic accident, or is a small town hiding secrets? Conclusion. The Texas Rangers now oversee Natasha's case, but as of today, this case remains unsolved. If you have any information that could potentially lead to an arrest or help detectives with their investigation, please contact the Crime Stoppers hotline at 1-800-252-8477, or you can leave a tip online on the DPS Texas Rangers website. Who killed Will Hendrick? Moscow, Idaho, January 10th, 1999. William Hendrick, better known as Will, was a 25-year-old theater student at the University of Idaho. The university is located in the town of Moscow, Idaho. Will also had a job on campus with the custodial department, cleaning buildings, and was a well-liked person. Will had started at the university after a brief stint in the U.S. Navy, and eventually wanted to be an actor. In fact, he was recently cast in a small role in an action movie called Dante's Peak. Will lived off campus with his partner of 5 years, Jerry Schutz. Jerry was 35 at the time and worked as a manager of a shuttle company. On the night of Saturday, January 9th, 1999, Will went to a party hosted by one of his friends, Katie Payne. Will had previously been working with Jerry to remodel their kitchen and tried to convince Jerry to go with him. But Jerry was too tired, so Will went alone, arriving at the party at around midnight. Katie was hosting the party for other theater people at her apartment on the corner of C and Almond Streets. The party was in honor of spring semester beginning that Monday, so it was one last hurrah of winter break. Katie's apartment building had an outside staircase that led to the apartments and was 3 stories high. Katie's apartment was on the 2nd floor, and while her party was mostly theater students, there was also a party on the 3rd floor. The 3rd floor party was mainly comprised of what Unsolved Mysteries referred to as former athletes from the town high school. There did seem to be some overlap between the parties, as one of Will and Katie's friends, a woman called Karen, was having some kind of problem with her boyfriend, who was attending the upstairs party. Throughout the evening, Will seemed to be getting more drunk and went upstairs to speak with Karen's boyfriend. Katie and Will's other friends told him this was a bad idea. Eventually, Karen left the party, leaving Katie to talk with Will. At some point, Katie went back inside her apartment to call Karen to see if she'd gotten home safely. And by the time she came back out, Will was gone. However, Will's car, a 1984 brown Pontiac sedan, was still parked out front, so Katie assumed he hadn't gone far. A little while later, Katie heard a car speed away and again assumed it was Will. The next morning, Sunday, January 10th, Jerry called Katie to ask her to send Will home because they still had some remodeling to do. Katie told Jerry that Will was no longer at her apartment, and his car wasn't there either. At this point, both Katie and Jerry were concerned, so they both began making calls to Will's other friends, but no one had seen or heard from Will. Jerry also called Will's parents, Keith and Leslie, who still lived in Will's hometown of Lewiston, Idaho, but they hadn't heard from him either. According to one article, Jerry, Keith, and Leslie worried that Will had left the party on foot and tried to walk home. Keith, a law enforcement officer, said this is the most likely scenario with people who were intoxicated, and he was immediately worried that Will had gotten lost or fallen down and had hypothermia. He told Jerry to check the route, that Will would have walked or driven home that morning, but no trace of Will was found. But when Will didn't show up anywhere by Monday morning, his friends began searching Moscow for him. Will's car would be found in a parking lot in downtown Moscow, about a mile from Katie's apartment, and in the opposite direction of Will's home. All of Will's belongings, including his portfolio with all of his artwork. Jerry found it strange that Will's work keys were also in the car. He knew that if Will had lost, forgotten, or misplaced those keys, the university would have to rekey lots of buildings, and Will would foot the bill for that. One theory that popped up right away was that Will went off on his own. One of Will's friends, a woman named Kathy Sprague, stated that one occasion Will had talked about just walking away from his life. Jerry and Will's parents don't buy this, though. Will was auditioning for a play the next day, and he had a $6,000 financial aid check that needed to be cashed, so Will could pay his spring semester tuition. Katie thought Will's initial disappearance had something to do with the party, while his parents believed that it was because Will was gay. Jerry believes that Will's car had something to do with the case, as when it was found, there was mud caked onto the wheel wells, and the seat was pushed back further than Will normally had it. Jerry also believes that someone both men knew did something to Will, and recalled an incident in which he had to fire an employee of the shuttle company for using a gay slur towards Jerry after they had an argument. Around the time Will vanished, the man, who'd begun working for a long-haul trucking company, checked out a refrigerated truck to make a run. However, there is nothing concrete to link this man to Will's case. The police investigation into Will's case initially lackluster. For instance, they didn't impound Will's car until 3 days after it was found. The police deny this, however, saying they followed up on many leads, including one involving a man who lived in the apartment below Katie. This man said that on the night Will vanished, a drunk guy, who everyone believes is Will, walked into his apartment talking tough, and when the witness convinced him to leave, he did. This is believed to be the last confirmed sighting of Will Hendrick. In September of 2002, a hunter found portions of human bones in rural Lada County, outside of Moscow. Those bones turned out to be Will Hendrick. So now, this is a homicide investigation. But the cause of death couldn't be determined from the few bones that were found. There are some suspects in the case, including the former truck driver Jerry fired. Apparently, this man lived in the same trailer park as Will and Jerry. knew the two men, and Will had even stayed at his home. After Will vanished, the man up and moved to Florida and hasn't been cooperative. But there's no real evidence, and he has never been charged. Another suspect is someone who knew Leslie Hendrick, Will's mother. Apparently, her nephew's foster brother bragged about killing Will, or that someone she came in contact with as a law enforcement officer knows something. But there's no evidence to this either. Former Moscow Police Chief David Duke and former Lada County Sheriff William Roush never gave up hope of solving the case, even wanting to resubmit some physical evidence for DNA testing. When Roush took over as sheriff in 2004, he was shocked by the lack of follow-through in the case, stating that the former sheriff didn't follow leads in password-protected files, so Roush couldn't access his own reports. But there's no evidence of a cover-up by the local police. Sadly, Keith Hendrick, Will's dad, died in 2013. He didn't get any kind of answer about his son's case. Will's family and friends still hold on to the fact that because Will was gay, he might have been killed by someone he knew and was angered by it. There doesn't appear to be much going on in Will's case, no new leads, and nothing has been discovered about new DNA testing either. Arlene, Arkansas, 1994. This disappearance has been one dogged by controversy over the years, with a PII, or Public Interest Immunity, being taken out by the British government when the inquest into her disappearance took place. She was declared murdered in 2021, but with no knowledge on where she was buried, and the fact the perpetrator died before the findings of the inquiry were reached. She was last seen alive on August 14, 1994. Arlene was from a place called Castlederg County, Tyrone, Northern Ireland. On the night of August 13, 1994, Arlene had been babysitting for her sister, and when her sister had come home at 11, Arlene said she was going out with her friend Donna Quinn to a disco in Bundoran, County Donegal. She was out with Donna, Donna's boyfriend, and the boyfriend of Pat Quinn, Donna's mother. Pat Quinn's boyfriend was Robert Howard. He had an extensive history of petty crime, sexual assault, and traveled frequently throughout the UK and Ireland. At the time of Arlene's disappearance, he was out on bail for sexually assaulting a teenager in Castlederg, and was staying at his girlfriend's house. After Donna Quinn and her boyfriend were dropped off after the night out in Bundoran, he left with Arlene. He initially spread a story that he'd seen her the following day in another car with another man. But as time went on, he became the prime suspect. It also turned out that his girlfriend and her daughter provided effectively false alibis, as he basically breached his bail conditions for being out so late. The time lost before the police started to treat him as a suspect meant that he was able to sell his car, clean, and get rid of clothes, and possibly any other evidence. He was eventually chased and petrol-bombed out of Castlederg, initially moving to Scotland before settling in Kent, where he would commit the murder of Hannah Williams. To add to the indignity of her disappearance, Arlene's sister's house was raided by the police after a tip-off from a respected source claiming that her body was buried there. Going by the recent documentary, her sister said that the press were informed of this search before the family were, and the garden and the floor in the garden was excavated, with nothing found. No one knows for sure where her remains lie, but it is suspected that they are roughly somewhere in Tyrone or Donegal. Several searches have been carried out without any success. Robert Howard went on trial for her murder and was found not guilty. Yet at the time of the trial, he was already in jail, having been convicted of the murder of Hannah Williams. The inquest for Arlene Arkinson kept getting delayed for years, and when a public interest immunity was applied to certain aspects of the evidence, it made people wonder what it was about a teenager's disappearance that would need a PII application. There has also been rumors and speculation about the prime suspect being an informer of some sort. Others have claimed it was due to the police's handling of the case and the errors they may have made in the investigation. On August 1st, 2022, popular brewery owner Jesus Mourinho took a bus to the countryside instead of attending a business meeting and disappeared. What happened to him? Jesus Mourinho, 41, was a co-founder of Piglove Brewing Company in his adoptive hometown of Leeds, West Yorkshire, England. Due to his job, he was fairly well known and liked by the customers of the brewery. On July 31st, Jesus went out with friends until around 11:30 p.m. and was seen on CCTV in Leeds City Centre at 5:17 a.m. on August 1st. The day that he disappeared, Jesus was due to attend a business meeting in Manchester, about an hour away from Leeds. He had no known reason to avoid the meeting, and it was described as routine. His business partner stated, "We had a full day planned for the business which involved him. That's why he was up so early. It is extremely weird as he was supposed to be taking beer to Manchester. Instead of going to Manchester as planned, he took a bus to Harrogate around 30 minutes from Leeds and got off the bus at 6:49 a.m. near the border between Leeds and Harrogate. He was last seen on CCTV near Harewood Bridge, over the River Wharf, at 8:14 a.m. It's important to note that at the time, there was a drought and the river was running quite low. Underwater searches have been carried out, but with no trace found. Jesus hasn't been seen or heard from since August 1st. There is no evidence that he has traveled to his native country of Spain, and he didn't have his passport with him. He has not used his phone or bank card, and he hasn't contacted any friends or relatives in the UK or Spain. Jesus is described as 5'7" with a Spanish accent, long dark curly hair and a beard. At the time he went missing, he was wearing black jeans and a black t-shirt and carrying a black rucksack. He has an orange octopus tattoo on his upper left arm. His disappearance is described as out of character. Numerous alleged sightings have been reported, but none so far have been treated as credible. So, what do you think has happened to Jesus? Where did he go that day, and why hasn't he been found? Here is an update on this story. Police investigating the disappearance of Jesus Mourinho in Leeds have found the body of a male. The body was found by police search team on Friday, the 14th of April, afternoon on land close to the River Wharf in the Harewood area. There are not believed to be any suspicious circumstances. The family of Mr. Mourinho have been informed of this development, and inquiries are ongoing to confirm the identity of the deceased. And that, dear listeners, is the end of these True Unsolved Mysteries Volume 1. Thank you so much for listening, as these stories give me the heebie-jeebies. I don't know about you. If you are asleep, I hope Slumberland is treating you kindly. If you're awake, I hope you have enjoyed and thought through some of these cases. Until next time, I'll read to you soon. Have yourself a good morning, good afternoon, or a good night.